This is Ed in San Diego, and David Edick Jr. is also in San Diego area. Welcome.
Hey, good morning, Ed. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on the Global TV Talk Show. So we're going to talk about a number of things, world affairs, local affairs, for a few minutes, it being the day before Election Day. And so the last major election, when the polls had it all wrong, this has kind of wised up some people, and they're being really careful on predicting how things are going to come out. But it certainly looks like Republicans, for better or worse, are going to take over some seats in
Yeah, I think so.
a lot of places.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things that have already been passed in Congress, will they get implemented?
I think that, for the next 2 years, yes, because in order to pull down legislation that's already been passed and signed by the president, you need the president to sign on to that. The Congress can't do what it wants entirely. So this will become there'll be a lot of political footballs pulled into the public light for sure. A lot of the decisions that have been made will be relitigated in the world of politics over the next couple of years. And I think business is boggled and befuddled by that challenge. It's a real headwind to investment for sure.
Yeah, people are going to be cautious. So the real estate business, the real estate market, just in the press this morning, I was reading early this morning that home prices have not toppled with such a fast increase in mortgage rates. Historically, that means a drop in real estate prices, especially considering the rapid increase over the past 2 years here in San Diego and other places. Some genius, I forget who, was saying that markets like Phoenix, which has seen an extraordinary jump in values, not only sales, but the values, is on the precipice of a major drop, maybe as much as 30%, coming fairly quickly in a sale price. But San Diego is not predicted anyway by this genius to fall off much at all, which is really, surprising. But I'm thankful. But but if you're going to buy something, maybe hang out a couple of months and look in Phoenix, Scottsdale. It might be a good time to invest there. I don't know.
Well, it's transaction volumes are falling off pretty sharply.
Yeah, people can't get mortgages.
Right. What's interesting though, and it feeds into the inflation outlook and just how this is all going to roll out. The public remains immensely cash rich, and while a large percentage of the public does not share in that surplus cash situation, it's very powerful. So, people that are that benefited really from the PPP program, who were not able to spend on travel and various other services, ended up with a lot of cash on hand, and they're still in the position to buy. And usually they've got equity, tend to be on the older side, so they've got equity, and if they don't, they might be able to draw from parents. Real estate's still moving here in the neighborhood, and we're in the values have slipped from maybe 1.8 edging to 1.2 million, which is nuts. I mean, 500,000 should be. And now transacting around, edging just under 1 million. So the prices are down, but the transactions are being conducted, and houses are on the market for not much more than a month now. So I think this means, though, ultimately that the disinflation that the Fed is looking for is going to be slow in coming. We'll see it in a lot of goods, but I think interest rates, as Powell said the other day, that the interest rates will be higher for longer than the market expects.
So people who have recently sold their home or sold some property they're sitting on a pile of cash, and they're waiting. If there's going to be a drop in real estate somewhere, these people, whoever they are waiting to pounce and scoop something up. In my view, yeah.
There is some of that. The challenge there is, if you've sold place, where are you living? So you need to buy a place or rent a place. And
That's right.
I'll be on a panel on Wednesday, and the chief organizer, they sold, and they are now moving month by month as they wait to get into the market again and to buy something. And it's a very challenging market still. So it's there are those that are going to be able to, if you move from a really high price market like California and move to a popular destination like North Carolina, you're able to pocket some proceeds for sure. But I think, that's very much a challenging shell game, as you've experienced in the past, big recession in the Northeast, people want to move to California. You got to find somebody to buy and cash it out, and then you're going to step in to buy another place. And how to liquefy that process, how to make it fluid is a real challenge right now. And I guess companies and organizations probably are stepping in a bit, maybe.
Okay, so the last time this kind of thing happened was as far back as I can remember anyway. It was in like 82, 83. And because interest rates were really high, to tame inflation, the same story. And that's when President Reagan got elected, and he was building up the Defense Department to fight the evil empire at the time. And that was all centered here in Southern California. And some other places. And the only people who could afford to buy a home in the early 80s were people who were working for big companies, tech and aerospace in particular, and anybody connected with that, because they had cash flow. Their business was strong, and mortgages, they got the mortgages, and a lot of other people didn't buy homes. And that's what fueled the California boom in prices at that time. And so, and banks were offering certificates of deposit at a relatively high rate, 8, 9, 10, 11%, if they locked up money for some years. People could double their money if they held on 10 years at 10 or 11%, right? So I see that potentially coming very soon, because the banks will pay that interest rate in order. And so that's going to pull money out of the real estate market. Not totally, which could, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, is it? Because the prices will come down a little bit, and then more people with this cash will go back and buy something. And
I think,
Fascinating.
yeah, I think one difference between then and now is that people are at a different age. The demographics are different. And I think that I really wonder how this baby boom generation, which is moving into retirement in a big way, uh, how they handle how they spend, invest, and borrow is I think is going to be a bit different this time around. So people are cash rich. There's an aspect of being cash rich, have been asset rich, and now asset prices are coming off. Um with the Reagan defense boom, which was really noticeable here in Southern California, as you point out, that was government cash. The IRA program, Inflation Reduction Act, if you will, and decarbonization and repowering America's energy sector, electricity in particular, it's really dependent on tax credits, either investment credits or in some cases production credits. And I just wonder how that government push of money in is going to affect things, but also how as asset values really come off, and then equities are sold off a bunch, and I think that that's going to continue. It amazes we what I read, basically from an entire generation of money people that have never seen a real recession. Well, 2008, but not with an inflation component to it. So it's going to be an interesting ride here. But I do think the demographics are going to have an effect that may be unexpected. It's worth paying attention to.
Mhm. So let's turn our attention to something ugly, and Ukraine and Russia and NATO. Um, we'll leave China alone for the time being, but
But we're
so
not.
yeah. Um, I this is live TV here, so I'm editing my own words as I'm going along, but the poor people of Ukraine are all going to get sick from having no heat, no fuel, no light. It's going to make them crazy.
Yeah, new tactics here to go after the energy infrastructure. The Russians going after energy infrastructure in Ukraine is definitely a problem for Ukraine and Ukrainians. And the Ukrainian government has urged people to not come back, refugees to stop coming back, because a lot of them have come back. Surprisingly, big number have come back. But the big cities are going to be infrastructurally challenged in terms of power, heat, and water. So they're advising people not to come back, or find some other place to be. And um, yeah, yeah,
Disruption. Yeah.
disruption. And I think it's when the United States went into Iraq, I mean, that was basically the first target, one of the first targets for the U.S. targeting was power infrastructure, energy infrastructure. That was not done so much by the Russians this time, but now it's clearly a target. My sense is that the Russians are pushing for some kind of freezing of the conflict, slowing it down, not just the winter, but just even withdrawing from the west side of the Dnieper River. We'll see if that actually happens.
So you mean like a reduction, if not cessation, of missile attacks and using the cold weather and no heat and no light and fear as a major tactic?
Well, I think the missiles continue,
Mhm.
and because so far, uh, Zelensky has been clear that his government will not negotiate with Russia as long as Vladimir Putin is in office. So there's combat continues, politics by other means in this case. So, and the Russians are scrambling for tools, if you will. I think the missiles remain a relatively effective kind of a terroristic thing. But I'm reluctant, honestly, to use that word. It's just a degradation of public capacity. But the Kremlin's, Putin's temporary withdrawal from the grain export agreement, Turkish UN brokered grain corridor, export corridor of 3 major Ukrainian ports. The Russians had signed on to that and had provided inspection teams for inspecting the ships that were coming into and leaving the Black Sea. But they withdrew that, suspended that for a couple days after some drone attacks on some of the ships of the Black Sea Fleet in Sebastopol and Crimea. But Putin backed off that in a couple days. The messaging internationally, not so much from the West, but from low-income countries, big low-income countries, Indonesia, India. The Turks played an important role in getting him to think through that decision. So I think the Russians are limited in their tools right now, but the Ukrainians are under tremendous stress. While there have been some significant military advances, really significant military advances, they're broke. And in order for this all to sustain going forward, the Ukrainians will require a steady inflow, a substantial steady inflow of arms and munitions, and they will require billions of dollars, $3 to $5 billion a month to keep this going, to hold up their end, not just to advance on the Russians and reclaim Ukrainian territory, but to hold their own. And I think the longer this goes on, the more difficult it'll be, and that's part of the calculation from the Kremlin.
So is that, I mean, who's spending that money? The US is that a World Bank thing?
There have
I mean,
been
the Russians have to pay for all that.
well, I don't follow on the Russians part, but the US is the primary source of funding for the Ukrainians. There have been some funds that have come in from IMF and World Bank that weren't so much related to the war itself. And those monies are limited, substantially limited. Some of them were already in the pipeline before the war. Europe is not providing the kind of funding that one might expect, maybe, but it's the US that's carrying. And quite honestly, the Ukrainians are really, they have benefited greatly from this grain export corridor, the economy, not the Kiev, not the war fighting, but keeping the economy going. It's a big farm, big country, agribusiness, agricultural processing, farming, logistics for all of that. It's really important, and the grain deal has been really important to keeping that flow going. But as we started off talking politics here in the United States, as we go into recession, and Europe is going to have is in the early stages of what will be a terrible recession for them. Sending arms, selling arms is kind of one thing, but cutting checks and making big wire transfers to abroad, the politics of that are going to get more difficult going forward, I think.
So, I mean, the U.S. is just printing the money, but I mean, where are we getting it from? So,
Borrow it. It's old American tradition. Sorry.
from
Ourselves and from the
yeah,
international,
yeah.
the high dollar, there's a lot of money coming into the US.
So, is that an inflation augmenter?
I don't think it's a serious one. It
That's
certainly is.
amazing, isn't it? All that money.
Well, $5 billion is a lot of money until you start looking at the U.S. Federal budget and just the scale of the U.S. economy.
Yeah, it's huge.
But on an annual basis, let's just say for rough calculations, $5 billion a month is $60 billion a year. That's real money. Yeah. So, I don't know how inflationary it is, but clearly the foot is off the gas pedal in Washington. Austerity is underway, and there'll be more of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, why don't we talk about something good? Got anything in mind?
Well, it's not all gloom and doom in the sense that it's. I have to say I've been really impressed at how Europe looks like they're going to make it through the winter without a physically debilitating gas crisis. It looks like they're going to be able to balance the supply and demand and storage through the winter, which is really pretty impressive.
So, is that because of natural gas coming from the U.S. and other places?
Very much from the U.S. One of the unexpected developments this year has been China's not importing LNG, and they've been selling it back onto the international market. So the LNG that would have gone to China has been going to Europe, and that is a substantial. I think in terms of it's substantial. More than half of what the anticipated growth in LNG imports into Europe were going to be. The U.S. is producing at maximum capacity. The Freeport facility, which is about 20% of U.S. exports, has been down since a bad fire in June, and looks like it'll restart maybe this month, probably next month. We'll see. They have some issues of safety culture at Freeport. The U.S. production capacity will grow slowly over the next couple of years. So the surprise has been the fallback in Chinese demand, which has been beneficial to Europe. So U.S. exports that would have gone to China have been going to Europe instead.
So, you think Putin and Xi are talking about that?
I don't think so. Not too much. Where they do talk are Russian pipeline development out of eastern Siberia to China, though that's the Power of Siberia pipeline, big, will ultimately see 38 billion cubic meters a year flowing to Russia, and there are plans for another 10 billion cubic meters out of Sakhalin, and talking about an additional pipeline from Western Siberia. It's a slow process because the fields that produce the gas in Russia and Eastern Siberia are under development. And this is out in the middle of the taiga. I mean, this is massive infrastructure development out in the middle of nowhere. And I mean in the middle of nowhere. So the Russians have invested heavily in the pipeline, which is now built, and are now developing the fields, and that gas is flowing increasingly into China. So the combination of the pandemic, which has restrained economic demand in China for fuel, to some degree, the reduction of very expensive LNG imports has been compensated by more gas, relatively inexpensive contract gas coming in from Russia. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of communication going on between the Russians and the Chinese right now. From the Kremlin's perspective, this special operation in Ukraine was supposed to last a week. Here we are at the end of the year. I mean, nobody expected what has transpired. Nobody. And it's kind of a nightmare for the Chinese. So, and then they've been frustrated by this whole thing. So yeah, there's communication, but the tone has shifted. Yeah.
Let's address Latin America for a second here. Okay. So the Mexican economy is pretty hot, booming. Automotive,
yeah,
energy,
export, the trade side.
Yeah.
Energy is a mixed bag. Mexico's domestic economy is, I would say, kind of on the weak side, the domestic demand. Mexico is benefiting from the move out of China, which is really developing momentum globally. And I think we'll really see it over the next couple of years.
Manufacturing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is headed into very challenging times. I mean, this is a Cold War. The technology sanctions that the U.S. put on the Chinese in late September or early October are really profound. Anybody that thinks that things are going to go back to the way they were or are going to be comfortable, they're not. And if someone is dependent on manufacturing goods in China for distribution in the world, they need to be thinking about plan B yesterday. The geopolitics are driving this. It's no longer about economics. And Washington, I mean, Beijing is a handful, let's be clear. And how Xi Jinping wants to run China, and the domestic tensions that are building, stresses that are building inside China. That's really his first priority ultimately. But DC we're decoupling, and there's a tremendous pressure on the Europeans to decouple. So there's a lot of manufacturing that has begun to investment to replace or to create the resilience, business resilience, if you will. There's a lot of money that is going into Mexico, and there'll be more to come. But that's one of the challenges for Mexico, is for Mexican citizens to truly feel the benefit of that. It benefits the elite for sure. And there are workforces that get hired in, yes. But there's a reason why AMLO was elected and remains immensely popular, despite all of this kind of rugged form of governance. I mean, the guy is from another, he's a dinosaur in a lot of ways, but he's still popular. Why? So yeah, Mexico will benefit from decoupling in a big way. And a lot of it's going to come back to the US too, but nobody should be looking for much hiring. It's going to come back in the form of automation and yeah, we'll see manufacturing come back here, but I don't see manufacturing employment growing. In fact, I expect it to fall with the, with rising interest rates and a recession.
And so more automation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we see that with Musk and Tesla.
Yes.
Building these
Yeah.
giant factories. It's almost robots.
Yeah.
That big Tesla plant in Austin,
Mm.
it's huge.
That's what I'm hearing coming out of the world of manufacturing is we're happy to come back to the US, but we all still have to be attentive to costs, and labor costs are rising still, even though a lot of the workforce is losing from inflation, and that's going to create some interesting dynamics in the workforce as much of the workforce moves toward retirement or retires. How to engage with people to come in, and those people that are going to get jobs in that reshoring manufacturing will have to be skilled, and it's going to be interesting. That part of the Inflation Reduction Act is an attempt to deal with some of the labor issues, but it's a lot easier. There's a lot of incentives and attractiveness to investing in automation rather than investing with complicated people.
So as we come to a close,
Yeah.
can we just address for a moment the infrastructure bills and spending that money? We see it, of course, here in downtown San Diego, which is absolutely in a mega boom, topped off by the airport, rebuilding, spending between $3.5 billion and $5 billion over the next 10 years. And it's already begun. They're rapidly putting up that structure. And then they talk about roads, they talk about other things, but every corner here, almost every corner that has a parking lot on it right now in downtown San Diego has been recently walled off, which means construction is going to begin even in this economic environment.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it's almost like this in every cycle. It seems that the late cycle build out, putting up commercial, and in this case in San Diego, a lot of residential downtown, and of course there's a need for housing big time because more supply. I mean, obviously pricing is telling us that there's an issue with supply. Infrastructure, I think the one of the challenges for the Inflation Reduction Act is, as I've begun to follow this more closely, while the legal framework was passed in the law, the rules of the regulation still have to be written, and that's a process, and it's going to be a full employment act for legal and accounting services, in my mind, no doubt. And those with money will benefit because essentially the government is providing a guaranteed market through the production credits and tax credits. But legal infrastructure, if you will, the regulatory infrastructure still to come. Good news is, across the United States, very quietly, we are investing in airports. We're refitting, rebuilding, and in some cases expanding our airports, which, a decade ago were pretty dismal. I mean, bad. But it's getting better. So I definitely find that encouraging. The cash flows are there to support it. And we do need the, it was just a screaming need for investment to take place in that infrastructure. Yeah, so I mean, San Diego has benefited because, as you know, you go into fly, I mean, the airport's crowded. And the facilities in Terminal 1, for example, Terminal 1 built, in the 60s, I think, had really begun to show its age. And it'll be interesting to see how the neighboring road and rail infrastructure integrate. And I think a lot of the investment to come will be in those related infrastructures. So,
Yeah, no doubt about it. Listen, I've really enjoyed speaking with you and learned quite a bit here today. And I hope our audience recognizes the depth of your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed.
Have a good day. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is Ed signing off in San Diego. Bye-bye.